Welcome to another exciting virtual literacy event. I'm Rachel, the Adult Outreach and Event Coordinator for the Greenville County Library System, and I'm so glad that you joined us here this afternoon. If this is your first time using Zoom, be sure to familiarize yourself with the mute button in the bottom left of your screen. You'll want to stay muted while our presenter is speaking. You can unmute yourself to ask questions during Q&A, but also please feel free to use that chat feature in Zoom to ask questions which I'll then relay to the author. You can also use chat if you have any technical questions at all or library related questions throughout the evening. Direct any of those to me, the host. You'll see my name as GCLS Adult Programs. Now, this is our first panel in our two-part Afternoon of Mystery event. Be sure to stick around for part two, where we'll hear more from Katrina as well as our celebrated local authors. If you want to make sure you're always on top of what great virtual events we have to offer, be sure to check out our website, greenvillelibrary.org, and peruse our events calendar. We are so thankful to Sisters in Crime of upstate South Carolina for sponsoring this wonderful event today. And so I'm just going to introduce you to the president of Sisters in Crime, the upstate chapter, who has helped organize this wonderful event. So Sally Handley, she's the president of Sisters in Crime upstate South Carolina chapter and a member of Sisters in Crime Guppies. She's the author of the Holly and Ivy Donnelly mystery series and recently published Murder Under Tuscan Blooms, the fourth book in that series. A resident of Malden, South Carolina, Sally devotes her time to writing cozy mysteries and gardening and also writes a blog on writing, reading, and retirement. And I'll be posting a link so you can check out her website in the chat. So welcome, Sally.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you today. And last year was the 25th anniversary or the 125th anniversary of the first Agatha Christie book and the 90th anniversary of the first Nancy Drew book. And we had a wonderful afternoon of mystery planned for you back then, but we all know what happened. So since then, the library and Sisters in Crime have become very, we're pros now at running these online events. And so we're just delighted to be here and be celebrating the 91st anniversary of Nancy Drew and the 126th anniversary of our mystery writing trailblazers. Before I introduce our wonderful guest speaker, I'd like to tell you just a little bit. I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Sisters in Crime. The organization was founded in 1986 with the purpose of helping women who write, review, buy, and sell crime fiction. Ultimately, the goal was to become a service organization for anyone involved in writing mysteries in the mystery field. And I'm very proud to tell you that today we are 4,500 members plus. We have over 73 chapters. We are an inclusive community, and we are the service organization that our founders had envisioned. To learn more about us, you can go to www.sistersincrime.org. And we have a local upstate chapter, and we host monthly events with guest speakers, and we have a monthly book club. All our events are free, and for the time being, all of our programs are online. They're open to the public. You don't have to be a member. And you can find out more about our chapter events at www.syncupstatesc.blogspot.com. Or you can just email me, sally@sallyhandley.com, to get on our email list. So now let me tell you about our guest speaker. She's an award-winning author and a past national president of Sisters in Crime. She's born in Edinburgh, Scotland, but she now lives in California. She's written 15 books in her Dandy Gilver series that are set in Scotland in the 1930s. And she's written 3 books in her Lexi Campbell series, 2 of which have won Lefty Awards for Most Humorous Mystery. and she's currently nominated for an Agatha Award for Best Historical Novel for her standalone novel, The Turning Tide. She's been nominated or won just about every mystery writing prize there is. But before becoming a mystery writer, Katrina earned her PhD in linguistics from Edinburgh University. And she worked a little bit in banking, which she considered hopeless. She did some library work in studies in fine art, and she loved that. And then she had a short burst in academia, which she considered hell. So, but in her own words, she's been writing books full time since 2005 and hopes to never hold a proper job again. And for those of us who enjoy her work, we're glad of that. We hope so too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Katrina, Dr. Katrina McPherson, who's going to talk to us about sisters, dames, and girl detectives. Katrina, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sally. Yeah, that my glasses have just steamed up. That was just lovely. Yes, I've finally found my home here in the tribe of mystery writers, but I did love working in that library. I'm second generation library. My mum worked in a library and I adored it. So yes, thank you, Sally, for the suggestion of what to talk about this morning. Happy 100th birthday, Dame Agatha. Happy 90th birthday, Nancy Drew. Happy 36th birthday, just a baby, Sisters in Crime. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I've got an hour, right? So I've got to admit, I haven't timed this talk that I'm going to give, so I'm just going to talk and then there'll be time for questions. And I'm going to take a really personal journey through the topic of deadly women on and off the page, because it's been a very personal journey for me. I'm British, Scottish, and I'm 55, as you can see. It's been a hard year. And in my childhood, women wrote the books. Now, of course, that wasn't entirely true. Roald Dahl published Charlie the year before I was born, but he was a very odd exception. As far as I and my three sisters were concerned, writers were women. Beatrix Potter, Enid Blyton, Noel Stratfield, writing about ballet. Josephine and Joanna Pullen Thompson wrote about ponies. Jean Estherow wrote about ballet as well. And Louisa May Alcott, obviously. And then when we got a bit older, it was Jilly Cooper, Nora Loft, Susan Howitch, Barbara Taylor Bradford, the Bronte sisters, the Blessed Jane Austen, and even George Eliot was secretly a woman. Busted. So we just firmly believed that women wrote books. Of course, there was Agatha Christie. Now, Agatha might be the epitome of the person who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyway, because I just want to say, oh, I'm roasting. I don't want to say I'm roasting, I'm hot though. 74 novels, 28 short story collections, and the longest running play in theatrical history. I am going to just bring up the chat room really briefly here. Who's seen The Mousetrap? Oh gosh, you put my coat back on though. That's gross. Yeah, me too. And I think it was, last spring when we were realizing it's not just happening here and it's not just happening in my town, it's happening all over the world. The thought that the Mousetrap run had been suspended was one of those really early COVID moments that made me think, this is worldwide. This is, the thought that theatre in London was not showing the Mousetrap tonight. Its run has ended, although I don't know if they're going to say its run's ended or just suspended. Anyway, Agatha Christie. For me, growing up and becoming a writer, she was much more than entertainment and education and fun, although she was all that. I think we are all, see, I've been out of academia a long time, but I have a thesis to expound this morning. I've got a theory that I'm going to roll around. And here we go. I think all of us British crime writers and all women crime writers everywhere in the world, we are the granddaughters of Agatha. And I think she shows that all it takes is one shining example to make a huge difference. And this is one of the reasons I think representation is so important. why Sisters in Crime is so important, why we need visible, prominent Black, Indigenous and people of colour who are writing, why we need visible, prominent LGBTQ plus writers, visible, prominent writers with disability. And so I'm going to, one of the few good things about COVID is that I am here in my study and I can hold up books. So for instance, recently, From the Desk of Zoe Washington by Janai Marks is a YA crime novel about a intrepid, feisty, irrepressible little African-American girl. I didn't have anything like that when I was a kid. So important. This book, Winter Counts, by David Heska Wandley Wyden, is a beautiful, I mean, heart-stopping novel about a Lakota enforcer. And Lakota people have reviewed this saying, I wept. You know, I've read books about Sioux people, I've read books about Cherokee people, but I've never read a book about a Lakota detective written by a Lakota man. Oh, representation is really important. And also this book, Tricky, by a friend of mine called Josh Stallings. Josh is severely dyslexic and one of his sons has an intellectual disability, and that son helped Josh, didn't quite co-write, but helped Josh write this book, Tricky, about an ex-gang member with an intellectual disability. So I think, you know, these books that are coming out now are so important for the writers, for the little African-American girls, for the severely dyslexic writers, for the Lakota people who want to believe they can get this big, big, important book. And that is what Agatha Christie did for me and did for all women crime writers in Britain. Because we're the granddaughters of Agatha, we're the daughters of Ruth Rendell, we're the daughters of Phyllis, P.D. James, we're the wee sisters of Val McDermott and Denise Mina and Ellie Griffiths, and more and more and more. And before I moved here, and I'm very happy here, thank you for having me, I am going to say this, before I moved here in 2010, the notion that it was a struggle for women to be successful crime writers would have been as weird as finding it strange that women were nurses or indeed librarians. And when Val McDermott flirted with a chapter of Sisters in Crime in the UK, the feeling was, why, what do you mean? Why? I mean, she couldn't get it off the ground. Which is not to claim any kind of moral superiority whatsoever for Britain as opposed to America. I mean, absolutely no way. It's just that Agatha Christie happened. And because she happened, she was there, representation was there. And when Agatha Christie happened in the UK, here, Dashiell Hammett happened and Raymond Chandler happened. Maybe the US Ruth Rendell was Ed McBain. Maybe the US P.D. James was Ross MacDonald. And Harlan Coben here is like Anne Cleeves there. Totally by accident in the beginning and then by virtue of representation. Of course, we had Arthur Conan Doyle and now we've got Ian Rankin, thankfully. And you had Mary Higgins Clark and Sue Grafton, both of whom I met. And that is one of the most fortunate accidents of my life. And the Mary Higgins Clark Award awards fiction like Mary Higgins Clark wrote, and now we've got the Sue Grafton Award too. So it's a complete accident. And don't get me wrong, there is plenty lazy, drawling, ignorant criticism to be found over there in the old country with respect to Agatha Christie. And I'm going to run through some of it now because sneering back at people who are sneering is fun. I was sneered at for reading them and when I was in university. There was a little wee bookstall in the basement of the building where I had my linguistics lectures. Gus used to sell these, disgusting, how ugly is that, 1970s, 80s editions, and I would buy them voraciously and go upstairs and put them down on my desk and have these people sneer at me for reading them. People who'd never read them. And it reminds me of, I mean, this kind of thing still happens. People sneer at Agatha Christie. Oh, I just want to show you, since I showed you that ugly one, here's a palette cleanser. Here's one of my beautiful Agatha Christie's. I have got rid of most of those and found these lovely old Collins Crime Club editions. People sneer without having read them. And what I would like to say is stop stealing her plots if she's no good, right? Because the plot of The Moving Finger still turns up all the time. The ABC murders plot is a staple of modern serial killer novels. And the plot of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, And Then There Were None, and Murder on the Orient Express are just genius. I mean, we can't see it now unless we look objectively, because we grew up with these stories, but they dropped like bombs when they were new. It was astonishing stuff. It's like, you know, I'm going to ask people to put their hands up again. Who's seen the Matrix trilogy? Yep. I don't know if anybody's. You don't need to put it in the chat books. People have seen the Matrix trilogy, right? Remember how remarkable it was. Remember how the green lines coming down. Just remember, and the bullet cam. Remember how remarkable it was. And then when the second Matrix movie came out, every building society ad and every kind of rock music video had used those techniques, and they were tired. And so I remember being in the cinema when the code trickled down over the screen, that green code, and someone went, "Oh, I really wanted to punch him." But I didn't, because that's a slight overreaction. But we're so familiar with them that we can't see how fantastic they are, but they're still being stolen. And people also sneer that her characters are thin. Now, I put it to you, my lad, that she wrote two great characters, Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. Today's talk is about deadly females, and it just so happens that I prefer Miss Marple to Hercule Poirot, but I'm not going to skate past him. I would say he's the direct descendant of Sherlock Holmes and the forefather of so many fidgety, persnickety, dysfunctional detectives that we love today. So I would say Harlan Coben's Wynne, Lee Goldberg et al.'s Mr. Monk. And I would also argue that Hercule Poirot lives rent-free in the heads of the writers who created the shambolic alcoholics that we know and love, the kind of anti-Poirots. So Rebus and Frost and Morse, and maybe even Columbo. This is what I truly believe. We can have an argument in the Q&A. So I've got a lot of time for Hercule Poirot, but then there is Jane Marple, a sweet little old lady, pink and white, knitting baby clothes, and also considering the causes and effects of evil, and as Agatha Christie said, going forth to do battle with it. Doesn't that sound great? I want to live like that every day. Now, some of my favourite Marple quotes are not just timeless, but they are actually quite horribly relevant today. For example, I'll give you this one. This is from Agatha Christie herself. People with a grudge against the world are always dangerous. They seem to think life owes them something. I mean, I think we're seeing that all around. We are seeing card-carrying members of the grievance movement very displeased by the fact that the world hasn't coughed up what they believe it owes. In Nemesis, the Miss Marple novel Nemesis, she also really slyly sums up the central tenet of a cozy mystery in a way that I've always loved. She says, Miss Marple herself says, "It has just happened that I have found myself in the vicinity of murder rather more often than would seem normal." I think could take over as the underlying premise of a cozy series. Sometimes there's no modern relevance or meta comment. Some of my other most favourite Marple quotes are just absolutely perfect summations of her time and place. So there's this from Murder at the Vicarage. It is difficult to know where to begin this story, but I have fixed my choice on a certain Wednesday at luncheon in the vicarage, which is just possibly the most Miss Marple sentence ever. Luncheon in the vicarage. I, as you can tell, adore her. She's old-fashioned, she's moralistic, but she's unshockable. She's modest and she's self-effacing, but she's deadly efficient in carrying the day. And she does have her blind spots, homemade wine for one thing, but I don't think Miss Marple has any blind spots that matter. I don't think the Miss Marple novels are problematic in the way that some Golden Age detective novels are for our modern, I don't want to say sensibilities or sensitivities, for our modern kindness, for our modern understanding of reality. I love her. Oh no, I'm not going to say that. No, I'm absolutely not going to say that. Some news broke about Miss Marple last week that wasn't supposed to have broken. Some people here might have heard it, but I'm not going to pass it on. So as well as Hercule and Jane Marple, she does have also numerous excellent secondary characters. So The Moving Finger is one of my very favourite Agatha Christie's, and I think Megan in The Moving Finger is a fantastic character. I wish I'd ever written a character like that. She's got a great take on King Lear, thinking he asked for it. He brought it all on himself, asking for praise all the time. No wonder they turned on him. I think the Doctor in Sleeping Murder is a marvellous character. And also Captain Hastings, who is in the honourable tradition of the Watson, but I think he's a better Watson than Watson was. I might be biased. So anyone who's sneering at her for having thin characters, I think, could usefully stop sneering. People also sneer, and this is not many people are saying, these are conversations I've had with people. People sneer that her language is restricted, to which I would say two words: Ernest and Hemingway. You never hear people say that Agatha Christie's language is crisp or pared back or muscular, God knows, right? Her language is restricted. Well, there you go. People sneer, I mean, possibly with slightly more basis, that her attitudes are outdated. So I'm thinking of Heidi, the maid or the housekeeper, I don't know what she's described as, in A Murder is Announced. And she's what Agatha Christie used to call Mittel-European, so M-I-T-T-E-L, European. And I mean, which means a refugee, which might conceivably mean Jewish. I am not sure. And Heidi in A Murder is Announced is portrayed as being extremely emotional, to the point of hysteria, although as it turns out, hysteria is the right reaction to what's going on in that house, right? I would say I'm not sure if that was Agatha Christie or if those were her character's attitudes. She was a well-travelled woman. She travelled in the Middle East and North Africa. She was an urbane woman. And I've not been able to, I mean, God, unlike Dorothy L. Sayers, who I love, but kind of love her like the uncle at Thanksgiving table. I'm not sure these are Agatha Christie's attitudes. I think these are her character's attitudes, that to be English is to watch a murder happen and say, oh my, whereas Heidi has no truck with that kind of frozen, shriveled buttoned upness. And when I was thinking about this talk, I thought, as well, I had a memory again from university days that made me think, it is not an insult to say that someone is more emotional than a British person. For a British person to find someone hysterical says more about us than it does about them. It was a moment when I was a graduate student when there were two Greek women who were doing their PhDs at the same time as me, Dora and Dimitra. And Dimitra passed her PhD. She found out that she had a PhD. And we were standing in the common room and we were saying, oh, that's fantastic. Well done. Let's all have a drink. That's wonderful. Congratulations. That must feel great. And she got more and more and more kind of blank and sad. And her eyes started to fill with tears. And I thought, gosh, I wonder what's wrong. And then the door blatted open. And there was Dora, who came firing into the room, body slammed Dimitra, knocked her flat on the ground and rolled about screaming. And that made Dimitra happy again, because that is how you celebrate. Not, oh, jolly well done, my dear. That's how you celebrate. So that's my defense of Agatha Christie's characters' frosty, snooty attitudes to people from other bits of Europe. And I think that sums up most of the sneering. So why is there all this sneering of someone who is the best-selling writer after the Bible? Is that right? I think I might have made that up, but you were in that general area. Certainly she wrote 78 novels on the longest running play ever. Here we go. Here's a pop quiz. What do Harlan Coben, Lee Goldberg, Ernest Hemingway, Ian Rankin, R.D. Wingfield, Colin Dexter, Bill Link, and Raymond Chandler all have that Agatha Christie didn't? Don't write the answer in the chat box, because this is a library and we don't do that kind of thing here. We know what they all had, but they didn't use it to write with, right? I am putting it to you, here's my central part of my theory, that the sneering about Agatha Christie is sexism, unpure, but all too simple. Hence, Sink. And it's still there, despite 36 years of Sink. People in our mystery community have called Sink achingly tedious when we talk about our mission. People, prominent people in our mystery community have said drawlingly, superciliously, I don't want to read a novel in which a hairdresser or a cat solves a murder. And I think those are two very different propositions, a hairdresser or a cat. That is more No Dogs or Irish than you often see these days. Still, there was someone who said it. But we don't make any apology for Sisters in Crime. We love libraries, one of the programmes. We love bookstores, one of the programmes. We love short stories, one of the programmes. And we say it with cash. We give money for books. We give money for events. We give money for subscriptions to short story magazines. We do plain simple good, as well as the monitoring project that keeps a beady eye on how many women crime writers are being reviewed in the broadsheets and the trade presses and the blogs. Okay, we just watch, we just look, and we publish. We are like Miss Marple, who said of herself, I'm a noticing sort of person. Things are getting better. I'm not going to, how am I doing for time? Things are getting better. 56% of the reviews in the general category of Kirkus Library Journal and Publishing's Weekly went to women writers in 2020, 44% went to men. So, you know, if it goes too far the other way, we're going to have to switch and work for equity for male writers. Crime specific magazines, it was 38% women, 62% men, which is a bit of a dip from 2019, although Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine was a notable example to that trend. Results for books for young readers had a terrible year. 17% of the review space in magazines, publications skewed towards the works of young readers were given over to reviews by women. So we need to carry on being like Miss Marple, as well as celebrating and giving away money. We need to be noticing kind of people. The work goes on. So I love Sink, Sisters in Crime, like I love Agatha Christie. And this love, you know, is fierce and protective and very personal. So, I mean, you know what I mean? You know, when you hear that there's going to be a new adaptation, you don't just wait with interest, knowing that it's nothing to do with you, what they do. You feel that you've got a say. You want to know what they're going to do to this story. I do. I can't be the only one. So it's always felt very particular, and it's always felt very personal, my love for Agatha Christie. And when I moved to the US and fell in with such a good crowd hanging around librarians and writers and readers, I met its match in the love that women, mostly women, but not only women, but women here have for Nancy Drew. Terry Jacobson, who is a librarian here in Davis in Northern California, heard that I had never read Nancy Drew and immediately bought one and pressed it into my hands. We were in a bookshop, so it was easy. I am not going to introduce Nancy Drew to this audience. I know I sort of introduced Agatha Christie, but I don't dare to introduce Nancy Drew in general terms, but I will talk about my relationship with Nancy Drew briefly. So my first Nancy Drew was that one that Terry Jacobson pressed into my hands. It was The Old Clock. And I've got to admit that I thought maybe you have to be raised on it, like haggis or gefilte fish, because I wasn't sure that I got it. But next I read The Hidden Staircase, which I've got here. I'll have to put this away. I read The Hidden Staircase next. These ones, the yellow ones, right? And I thought, oh, I do get it, because I've already read this book. This is Enid Blyton's The Treasure Hunters. It's the same book, except that in this book, no one drops her dad off at the airport in a convertible, right? That was, nobody would have been on a plane. But apart from that, they go to visit an elderly relative in a big posh house, who's not got enough money to keep the house and is going to have to accept an offer from a very shady, sketchy character to buy the house, unless they can find the treasure, unless they can find the hidden staircase and then the treasure. It's basically the same story, except one's English and one's American. So as soon as I read The Hidden Staircase, I absolutely got the fierce love that people here had for Nancy Drew. And oh my goodness, people love them. I am wearing, as you might have noticed, a Nancy Drew necklace, but there is a writer called Erica Ruth Newbauer, who has a Nancy Drew tattoo. She also has an Agatha Christie tattoo. And she also, her first novel, that's the wrong book. Her first novel, Murder at the Mina House, was a love letter to Agatha Christie. It's set in Egypt near the pyramids, and it's wonderful. It's not tricksy. It doesn't upend it. It doesn't problematize it. It's an honest to goodness golden age story. It's wonderful. Here's the second one. Wrong book. So up to and including tattoos, you know that people love Nancy Drew. I thought, well, how am I going to talk about Nancy Drew to these people who know about her so much, who know so much more about her than I do, and have known her for longer than I do? And I did what I often do, is I go to the hive mind. I went to Facebook and said, hey, Hive, what's your favourite Nancy Drew and why? And so I'm going to spend the rest of the time doing one of the nicest things I've ever done, which is passing on what people love and why they love it. In the first day, I got 100 responses from people saying, here's my favorite Nancy Drew and why. And I sort of divided them into categories. A lot of people think, a lot of people, their favorite Nancy Drew is the first one they ever read. So Dana Cameron, a crime writer, said her first was her favorite, The Secret at Shadow Ranch. And Erin Mitchell, who's a publicist who works in the crime fiction community, said it's The Secret of the Old Clock because it's the first one she read. Julie Heisey, who's a mystery writer, said her favorite was The Hidden Staircase because it was her first. A friend called Taffy Cannon said, this really cracked me up, The Secret of Shadow Ranch was my first and remains my favorite. It's got bobcats, rattlesnakes, and river crossing on horseback. And again, I thought, yeah, they might be the same stories, but this is not the same world. There are no bobcats, river crossings on horseback, or rattlesnakes in Enid Blyton. Sue Hinkin said The Mystery of the Lilac Inn was the first one I ever read, and my life changed forever. And Rochelle Stab, who's a mystery author, said, I will always love my first, The Secret of the Old Clock. From there on, everyone was a treasure, and I swear Nancy raised me. Which is a wonderful thing to find that much love. I might break off. Am I going to break off now? Yeah, I'm going to break off now and say this. You know how people who use social media which, I mean, is all of us today, but people who use social media regularly, you know how you think there is nothing you can say or ask that's not going to make someone carp, that's not going to make someone sneer. So I've got a little GIF with a cartoon, two cartoon heads, and one cartoon head is holding the other one's mouth shut, and the speech bubble is, shh, let people enjoy things. So, you know, if you talk about a bike ride, people are going to talk about helmets and death. I shared a picture of a fish pond and people talked about herons and dead fish. You know, I've even shared a picture of a baby and had someone talk about overpopulation. That I thought there was nothing you could say that wouldn't bring out the misery guts in someone. But here it is, Nancy Drew. Over 100 responses and not a single person said, I think they're, you know, any kind of negativity. Anyway, so some people love the first one. Some people seem to love them because they brought their mothers back. So Meta Hansen Karademir said that her favourite was The Sign of the Twisted Candles. And she said this, my mom loved Nancy Drew. I sound stupid when I say mom. My mom loved Nancy Drew, and she gave her collection to me when I was a kid. They were in Norwegian, but I assume the translation is pretty true. I might be biased because her favourite is my favourite. And Lynn Vaughan remembers, my mother gave me the mystery at Lilac Inn, and I started buying a few with my allowance, but only after I'd read everyone that the library owned. And Alice Wright said her favourite was The Ghost of Blackwood Hall. I love this. She said, I admired the outfit on the jacket illustration, and as my mother made all my clothes, she duplicated it for me, and I loved it and wore it. I mean, that's just fantastic. There are other really intense childhood memories amongst these Nancy Drew memories from my friends on Facebook. Lynn Vaughan again said, we had an abandoned apple orchard down the road from our house at the time, and my friend Teresa and I would climb a tree next to an outbuilding, and we'd take our Nancy books with us and sit on the roof of the shed and read while we ate apples. Oh, which I think is the most perfect childhood reading memory. I didn't think that happened in real life. That's like something from a book, not something about a book. Cassie Mayo said, I have a very vivid memory of being given my first two Nancy Drews one year at a family Christmas gathering. I spent the whole rest of the day under the dining table reading them from cover to cover, which is a perfectly fine way to spend Christmas with your family, if you ask me. People also talked about Nancy Drew, the Nancy Drew books, not as, you know, content, I hate that word, content. They talked about the book as objects. So Fran Vea and Marjorie Tucker both reported that the physical book they owned was very dear to them, not just the contents of it. And Fran said she was shocked, that's her word, she was shocked to find out that those yellow spine Nancys weren't the originals. Terry Shames, that day that I said Hey Hive, had a copy of Mystery on the Moss-Covered Mansion, Mystery of the Moss-Covered Mansion from 1941, original publication, on her desk and sent me a photograph of it. So the books as physical objects are really important. I mean, some of them credit Nancy Drew with their future career. So Sheila Lowe, who is a crime writer, said, here's a cool thing. A friend of mine, an 88-year-old African-American woman, wrote some of the Nancy Drew books. And then she went on to write an Edgar and Anthony nominated series about a Black female detective. Her name is Chassie West. Chassie West was a new writer to me, but my order is in at the book depository. I'm giving myself credit for not saying book suppository. I call it that, you know, just for fun at home, and I've got to stop because I'm going to say it when I really shouldn't one of these days. In fact, I just did. And Dana Kammer again said her second favourite Nancy Drew book is The Message in the Old Oak because of archaeology. Dana's now an archaeologist. And Alexia Gordon, who's a crime writer, said The Secret of the Old Clock is my favourite because she was enchanted by the fake duplicate wills and used that trope in one of her Gethsemane Brown novels. So I am just going to note that it's mostly women. There were 3 men, and they all said that Passport to Larkspur Lane was their favourite. I mean, that's a small sample. It's not big enough to draw conclusions, but there were only 3 men, and they've all got the same favourite Nancy Drew. I haven't read it. Maybe someone can tell me why that might be. Finally, what I found really enchanting and cute was that people reading Nancy Drew when they were wee girls found out about the existence of a thing called a series. So here's Julie Heisey again. She said, I found The Hidden Staircase amongst my mum's old books when I was 9. I disappeared into a corner of our small house and devoured it. As I got into the final chapter, sad because it was ending, I was astonished to discover a mention of the next book in the series. And I looked for and found all the gorgeous yellow spines out there. Nancy and I became besties for the next several years, and I found out about series. Here's an even better one. Ovidia Yu, who's a mystery writer, said her favourite Nancy Drew is The Swedish Diary because it was my only one. I didn't realise until long after that it was one of a series. I thought the readers were supposed to write the stories described at the back and post them in to become the next book. That is the second most adorable thing I have ever heard about Nancy Drew. And this final anecdote is the absolutely most adorable thing I've ever heard about Nancy Drew before we move on to Q&A. This is from Fran Lebowitz. So again, I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's been watching her Pretend It's a City documentary on Netflix. It is hilarious. And every so often, I mean, you think you know who Fran Lebowitz is, and every so often she says something so surprising, which is she really likes little children, she loves parties, and she loves Nancy Drew. And she told this delightful Nancy Drew series. She said when she was a wee girl, she dropped a Nancy Drew and she picked it up and kissed it. And her mother said, what are you doing? And baby Fran said that she'd been told that you kiss a book after you've dropped it and picked it up. And her mum said, well, where did you hear that? And baby Fran said, at synagogue. And her mum burst out laughing and said, when you drop the Torah, Franny, not when you drop Nancy Drew. But Fran Lebowitz stuck with it. She still does it. And I'm thinking of starting. And that is my personal journey through Agatha Christie, little excursion into Sisters in Crime and Nancy Drew. And I'm ready for all questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. You inspired me to get my Agatha Christie covers out. They're the terrible old 70s ones.
Oh, they're awful, aren't they? I mean, look at that. How disgusting is that? It's just, but look how well read it is. It's in tatters.
Well loved.
Yeah.
All right, so everyone, if you have questions, please pop those in the chat now. If you would prefer to unmute yourself, just let me know and I'll make sure that you can do that. In the meantime, I'll go ahead while you're thinking of your questions. We had a couple pop in while Katrina was speaking. So here's the first one. They say, I love mysteries, but I have no idea to come up with one. How do you make sure you've tied up all the loose ends so that the story makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thankfully, there's a really easy answer, which is editing, rewriting. The first draft, it doesn't matter. Well, here's my method. The first draft, it doesn't matter because you're not going to show the first draft to anyone. The first draft is like singing in the shower. Someone at Erica Ruth's book launch party, which was just about a week ago for that second book. No, I'm not. I'll run off and get the first one before our panel. Put it behind me. Someone said that Susie Culkins, who's a historical mystery author, talks about the first draft as she just runs about with the pages catching the words, which is just a great image for what it feels like to write a first draft. So I think the thing is and Stephen King, who's another favourite author of mine, says what you do with your first draft is you chip the story out of the ground without breaking any bits off. And then, and it doesn't matter if there are loose ends because you fix it as you go back over it, and you don't have to tie up the loose ends that you've left. You can take out the thing that left the loose end, or you can add something else in that helps you tie it up. So as long as you never expect what comes out of you first, you know, the words that you catch with the pages, to use Susie's wonderful metaphor, analogy, I don't know, then you're probably going to be okay. and maybe keep a page, like keep a note of what hares you've started running, in case, I mean, it becomes so familiar to you. Once you've read it 7 times, it's just awful, and you can't see it. I mean, that's when I know that a book's ready to leave the house, is when I hate every page. And the only way, I've said this before, but the only voice I can read it out in is this. I just hate it. So maybe keep a note.
I think that's great advice. Help you keep track. Oh, someone did just ask, what was the name of the woman who wrote some Nancy Drew books and went on to write an award-winning
Oh,
series?
yeah, I'll write it in the chat box. Chassie West, who I had never heard of. Here we go. Chassie West.
Chassie with an IE. Very good.
So that's how she started writing under Carolyn Kane. She started writing Nancy Drew and then went on to be nominated for an Edgar and an Anthony for her own stories.
Just amazing. We have, I think, a paper book at the library written by Chassie West that you can check out. So do that. Right. Does anyone have any other questions? Take this opportunity. We very rarely get to speak with someone.
I'll answer any questions apart from the Irish border and the Brexit backstop. I will answer any questions that anyone understands the answer to. Yeah.
That's great.
Or not.
No, that's great. So when did you start writing?
When did you start writing? Yeah, this is, I mean, with apologies to people who've heard me talk about this before, I wrote when I was a wee girl, when I was a young child, and then I stopped when I was 13. A careers officer at my school came to visit, and I said I want to be a writer, and he said, they just scoffed it out of me, and I stopped writing, and I started again when I was 35. Which is such an overreaction. But, you know, my husband says writing is overreacting for a living. That overreaction, I think, is part of, I mean, it's part of where it comes from. I don't know if anyone else here who's on the screen now, so Polly and Linda and Cindy and Sally and Howard, writers here, are as happy as I am to admit this, but I just don't think that a kind of contented, laid back, accepting, zen, bovine frame of mind goes with writing stories. Because if you're the kind of person who goes, oh, look at that, that's weird, you know, well, how do you ever get to the end of a plot? We've got to be the kind of people who go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, you know, because that's, you know, oh, what's going to happen? But what if this happens? I mean, that's how we do it. So I'm claiming my enormous overreaction to what that careers officer said. So how I started writing properly was, I was so unhappy and bad at being a university lecturer that it was the only thing to do. It was the only other thing I'd ever wanted to do, and I couldn't do what I was doing. I was hopeless at it and so unhappy. So it was, it was inevitable. It, you know, it felt like the only way to turn life. But I mean, poor me, right? At a tenure track position in a good university. Oh, poor thing. But I hated it, and I was so bad at it. It felt like the only way to make life all right. And now, even on my worst day, I still love being a writer, because once you've done a job that you hate and you know you're bad at, nothing else ever feels quite as dismal again.
All right. So another question that came in is, you write historical and contemporary novels. What do you like best about each, and what are some of the challenges?
Oh, good question. I do. It is nice to not have to worry about anachronisms when I'm writing the contemporary fiction. So, you know, writing, I'm up to 1937 now, which is beginning to feel surprisingly modern. The nephew-in-law, the very nice young man who's married to one of my nieces, was joking just the other week about, you know, because someone had got in touch to say, I don't think your book should have gone the way it went. I think you should have written something else. And he said, I want Batman in Dandy Gilver, you know, as a joke. And then I realized I'm only 2 years out. I'm at 1937 and Batman starts in 1939. You know, a couple of years I can do it. but the not having to worry about anachronisms is lovely in the modern fiction. What's the best thing about the historical fiction now? It's that I've written about these people 15 times and I absolutely know who they are. So even though I've got to make up a victim and a villain and some red herrings and secondary characters, there's a little repertory theatre company of characters. So it does feel a lot like coming home. And, you know, anachronisms are not the only. I made a mistake. Oh, I made a mistake and only found out about it yesterday. Someone who'd just read that, Scott on the Rocks, got in touch to say that I had reversed the agricultural check station between Oregon and California and the town of Weed that's in California, because the border check is so far inside California that I have done that journey multiple times. And I only said Weed because I think it's funny that there's a town called Weed. They didn't have to stop in Weed. I just thought it was a cheap laugh. So that's, it's not, anachronisms are by no means the only route to embarrassment. But it's nice to avoid them.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have here's an interesting question. Does the strength of women writers in Great Britain, as opposed to the US, due in part to the fact that you've experienced being ruled by women and we have not?
Oh, the poor wee queen, right? I mean, whatever you think about a constitutional monarchy instead of a republic, you think, poor wee thing. Imagine being married for 70 years and then he's gone. Ocht. I think it's probably got more to do with Agatha Christie than it does with Her Majesty, Her Other Majesty. But it is a striking difference, isn't it? It is a striking difference. I mean, let's not get too far into politics, but and we've only had 2 female prime ministers, but every time Britain has a queen, my God, she makes a go of it, doesn't she? I mean, all the Elizabeth I, Victoria, and Elizabeth II, I mean, they don't flake. So maybe it does do something to her national psyche. And because she's got that look that could take down, a herd of charging bison, the look I mean. Yeah, I'm going to ponder on that one. That's a good point.
Hey, it's good to get questions that make you think a little bit.
Yeah. Quite possibly. There you go. Quite possibly.
Quite possibly. I like that answer. So tell us about your current standalone. What got you to take a break from your series?
Oh, so the current standalone, meaning the one that I'm writing or the one that's coming out? Because they've always been, the standalone that I'm writing now is, I think, number 10. So I have always written standalone contemporary psychological thrillers, domestic noir, suspense novels. I don't know what you call them. About the one that I'm written. So the last one I wrote was a huge leap for me, tiny leap for anyone else, huge leap for me, because it had 4 voice characters, 4 points of view, and I've never done that before. And I found it really challenging. And this one that I'm writing right now, which doesn't have a title, well, it's called Moonface at the moment, and it can't be called Moonface, I wouldn't have thought. The one that I'm writing right now, I had written about 30,000 words, and it was really tight. I think that took place over the course of maybe 2 days. And I thought the next thing that I want to happen is kind of 3 weeks away, and I don't know how to get from now to 3 weeks away. I think I've written more than 30 novels. But this is why I'm a dire warning, not a shining example. This broke on me like daylight after, dawn after the night. I said, just go back to page 1 and write part 1, new page, chapter 1. Then go to the end of 30,000 words and write part 2, new page, chapter 12. That's how you jump time. Just write it in 3 bits. and you don't have to fill all the time between the bits. So that's my new standalone, and it feels like a gift to just be able to not worry about what's going to happen, just miss it all out because nothing happened. The standalone that's coming, although I'm not entirely sure when, I'd be interested to know if other people are in this position as well because of the pandemic, just upending when if you're a self-published author, when it's a good time to drop a book. If you're traditionally published, when the publisher thinks it's a good time to drop a book, things are just really up in the air. But it's called A Gingerbread House. And obviously it's about something that looks really good and isn't.
Wonderful. We'll look forward to that when it comes out.
Should know. Often I find out if it's on Amazon, then I know for sure when it's coming out, and it's not on Amazon, so it's not soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone just be patient. That's what that means. And so one other question we got is about how long, so on average, does it take you to write your books?
The first draft, it takes theoretically about 10 weeks, because if I write 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week, then in 10 weeks I've got 100,000 words. So to get that, that story chipped out of the ground with no bits broken off takes, I would say, about 3 months, if nothing else. But I can only do one thing at a time. So I'm 40,000 words now into this book that won't be called Moonphase. But when the edits arrive for another book that's not Dandy Gilver, and it's not the California books, and it's not a standalone, well, it was maybe going to be a standalone, or if I was, maybe it's going to turn into a series, but it's set in 1948, and it's set in Edinburgh. It's about working class women. It's not Dandy Gilver. It's a very different world, set in the tenements of Edinburgh. So if the edits arrive for that, I'll have to stop because I can't do two things at once. And I'm also going to edit a book for someone else, someone who won the auction prize at Mystery Loves Georgia auction that we ran in January, I think it was. So I'm going to edit her book, and then I've got edits coming on number 4 of the follow-up to Scott on the Rocks. So I'll just have to stop. I would be really interested to know if other people can do more than one thing at a time. I can't. Yep. My husband, who's a professor, has got all these grad students and postdocs, and he collaborates with scientists at other institutions, and he keeps things ticking over, and he writes stuff and he teaches stuff, and he's got so many plates spinning at once, and he's really rude to me. He says, we've been married for 180 years, but he says, this is what he says, your working practice makes me think of when the rocks start to move in that movie Labyrinth. What a nerve. It's true though.
Well, he's hilarious.
Yeah, it is true. It's true. It's very monolithic.
Well, and I saw some of the other local authors on our panel coming up nodding their heads about only working on one project at a time, but we'll hear from them and see what they say in just a few minutes too. So we have another question for you. I think this will probably be one of the last ones we can take. Are there days when you struggle to write, and do you have any tips on slogging through revision after revision?
Right, so that's two questions. A day, like days on which I struggle to write for the first time, and then slogging through revision after revision. I would say so slogging through revision after revision, it's just the embarrassment and how public it's going to be. If you're on social media and you talk about your writing process, it would be such public humiliation if this book that you've been talking about just went away. So, and the only way to stop seeing it every day is to get it off your desk and send it to someone else. So I think it's just what else is it? What else is it like? It's just there comes a point where you think the only way to the other side of this is right through. and I so want to be on the other side of this. I'll just do it. When I know that it's time to let go is when I want to cut everything. When I just start to I could have a novel down to a haiku because I hate it so much, like I said. And I think, right, it's time for it to go. I'm so disenchanted, it's got to go. But bad writing days, how to keep going through bad writing days. I mean, just again, if you know that no one's going to see your first draft, it doesn't matter how bad it is. Just keep writing and think, I'll cut this later. And quite often you don't have to. I don't drink. If you drink, take the edge off with a little something, as they call it. Seriously, that works, because you stop caring, right? Just, I mean, not hammered, but you just a little, gin and tonic wouldn't do any harm. Also, this really works when you're really stuck, and because we imagine for a living anyway, this won't be difficult. What you do, or what I do, is you imagine that you are in that they're making a documentary about you as a writer because you're such a success, right? I mean, this should be embarrassing, but I don't care. So they need footage of you typing. So you just imagine that there's a camera crew and a director and everything, hair and makeup, in your office, and they need footage of you typing. So you have to sit and type. So you perform typing. And you go, well, this isn't real writing. This is just, this is just for the film. And then you keep it. That works.
I love that advice. I might use that for my work.
Yeah, for anything. That's how I did my PhD. I had such imposter syndrome. That's how I did it. I just imagined that I was being filmed typing.
Documentary.
Yes, for a documentary about a random student. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, we just have a couple more minutes before we have to take our break. So we'll just I'll ask this last question of you. Do you outline, plot, or are you a pantser?
Take a wild flying guess. I'm just going to say. Notice the kind of the wonder in my voice when I said, or do you know, maybe you could have a page of notes. I'm a huge pantser. Yeah. My most extreme pantsing experience was on page, I'm slightly making up the page numbers, but this is just about right. On page 447 of a book that turned out being 452 pages long. I didn't know who done it. And even I was beginning to feel a bit wobbly then, thinking this is really pushing it. And then I worked it out. No, I'm a pantser. But I don't think it matters. I think my first draft is what an outliner's outline is. Like an outliner wouldn't show her or his outline, like I don't show my first draft. A writer called Keith Raffel put it the best I've ever heard it, which is, we all do everything. We all do the wild bit. We all do the working it out bit. We all do the fixing it. We all do we all go round the merry-go-round several times. It doesn't matter where we hop on. I think that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been wonderful, Katrina. Thank you so much for sharing with us. But wait, don't leave, everyone. We've got a second panel. So we're just going to take a quick break right now. This is a great chance for you to peruse Katrina's website. And I'll pop that in the chat again. And to take a stretch break so that you can then focus on our next panel, which will feature local authors as well as Katrina. So you haven't heard the last of her yet. So stick around so you can hear even more of that. So we're going to start at 2:15 with the second panel, which is what we wish we'd known about the writing process. So we're going to take a quick break now. Thank you so much, Katrina.